Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 2026 Conference on Internally Displaced People. I'm Sarah Miller from Refugees International, and on behalf of my colleagues from Georgetown University, the Ukrainian Congress of IDP Councils, ODI Global, and the Office of the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Internally Displaced Persons, we're so glad to have you join us. This is our third year holding this conference, and we're more motivated than ever to engage on these important issues. We've assembled two fantastic panels for you today, as well as an intermediary session. One panel that's looking at the ways in which IDP communities protect themselves, and another that considers the role of IDPs in transitional justice and accountability. We're really looking forward to covering a lot of these important topics. But first, we have the sincere pleasure of welcoming the UN Special Rapporteur, Paula Gaviria Betancur, to open this conference with a few remarks. She has been the Special Rapporteur on the human rights of IDPs since 2022, and Paula began her career on the human rights of internally displaced persons at the Constitutional Court of Colombia, which issued the first ruling regarding the state's failure to uphold its basic obligations toward IDPs. She then worked for the Colombian Ombudsman's Office, the National Human Rights Institution, which developed an early warning system to alert the state of possible massacres resulting in the displacement of communities. Then, as part of the civil society in Colombia, she advocated for a law that recognized the rights of all victims. This led to the creation of a national policy, which she led the implementation of for 5 years. At the global level, Paula was a member of the UN Secretary General's high-level panel for internal displacement, which produced recommendations on how to better prevent, respond, and achieve solutions to the global IDP crisis. And this led to the Action Agenda on Internal Displacement. There's much more we could say about Paula, but we'll let her get to her remarks. And we're so grateful for her joining us and for her work and dedication. Paula, I'll turn the floor to you for your opening comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for that nice introduction. And just wanted to say, distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen, that I am deeply honored to address you today at the third Global Conference on Internally Displaced People, convened by my office together with Refugees International, Georgetown University, ODI Global, and the Congress of IDP Councils in Ukraine. And we are here today to discuss one of the most pressing challenges of our time, internal displacement, which continues to impose profound and lasting consequences on people, on communities, on institutions, and on countries. I am particularly grateful that internally displaced persons are key participants in this conversation, contributing their experiences and life realities. I call on all of us to be guided by their perspectives, their knowledge, their leadership. Protection and solutions must be shaped with, and not merely for, those most affected by displacement. Last week, I opened the online course on internal displacement at the Institute of International Humanitarian Law, and a participant from Lebanon reminded us that internally displaced persons are not just numbers. They are lives, they are families, and they are futures torn apart. As the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights of internally displaced persons, it is both a privilege and a solemn responsibility to advocate for the rights and protection of those affected by internal displacement. My goal as an independent global advocate is to underscore the critical importance of upholding human rights in the pursuit of durable solutions for IDPs across the globe. Allow me to begin by expressing my appreciation that this event falls in the week marking the 28th anniversary of the Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement. These 30 principles restate the binding norms of international human rights and humanitarian law, most relevant to internal displacement, and serve as a cornerstone and compass in our collective efforts to address the needs and rights of IDPs. They are written in clear everyday language, no law degree required, and are available already in 34 languages in a practical booklet format and easily to be used in meetings or in the field. Beyond their accessibility, they have also shaped laws and policies worldwide. Today, we have 51 countries that have specific IDP laws and policies, as reflected in UNHCR's IDP law and policy dashboard. I think we're sharing this with you in the chat. At last year's conference, I reported there were 46 such as laws and policies. So this reaffirms that national authorities are increasingly exerting primary responsibility to protect and assist their displaced citizens and residents. Now, as Special Rapporteur and as a co-lead of the IDP Protection Expert Group, we are working to support governments to better implement those laws and policies, including through peer learning between authorities from different countries and regions. And they are dedicated leaders out there, and we need to support them on their journey to protect and assist IDPs and establish conditions for durable solutions. And I hope many of them are joining us here today. One key challenge that governments often stress is that once they set up an IDP law and policy, they often do not have the resources to implement it effectively. The UN Secretary General's Special Advisor on Solutions to Internal Displacement made development finance a priority for his tenure, and I commend him as well as development actors such as UNDP, the World Bank, and others for increasing their engagement in situations of internal displacement. We need to do more, but we're on the right pathway. And we must not forget the essential role of peace actors. The full implementation of peace agreements must have durable solutions to internal displacement as one of their goals. And this can help prevent displacement from happening again and again, and to ensure that the gains of humanitarian and development work is not unraveled. Internal displacement is at record levels, with over 83 million displaced within their own countries, driven by conflict, by violence, by disasters, by climate change, a proliferating and protracted global crisis. There is a pressing need to prevent, to mitigate, to resolve the root causes and consequences of internal displacement. And this has been extremely difficult over the past year with massive funding cuts to humanitarian work. The trends we are seeing are distressing, with people forced to flee amidst conflict, generalized violence, and disasters, and then unable to access the very basic needed for survival while displaced and exposed to a range of serious protection risks amidst increasingly complex and protracted crises. In the Middle East, military strikes have temporarily internally displaced more than 3 million people in Iran and over 1 million people in Lebanon. In Lebanon and Gaza, we see widespread destructions of homes, blanket evacuation orders, and renewed forced displacement in the West Bank. This reflects utmost contempt for international law and civilian life, a grim reminder of the urgent need for international action and accountability. In Africa, we are 3 years into the current large-scale conflict in Sudan, which has evolved into a severe and devastating humanitarian crisis with no signs of abating. Indeed, conflict in South Kordofan is intensifying, and armed conflict and widespread violence have internally displaced at least 11 million people. Civilians on the run have faced unspeakable horrors, including gender-based violence, siege-like conditions, and indiscriminate attacks. Meanwhile, in Myanmar, almost 4 million people are internally displaced. The ongoing conflict involves regular airstrikes and shelling, including IDP camps, schools, shelters, gender-based violence, and arbitrary arrests, forced recruitment, movement restrictions, amongst many other violations. Displacement is compounded by the impacts of the 2025 earthquake and recurrent climate shocks, including flooding. Ethnic minorities, including the Rohingya, the Kachin, and others, bear the brunt of restrictions and access to rights. In Ukraine, 3.7 million are internally displaced, and some have faced repeated displacement, often due to the renewed attack on civilian areas, including during evacuation movements and in transit locations and infrastructure. Protection risks are cumulative and include inadequate housing, economic insecurity, and mental health and psychosocial distress, and also explosive ordnance contamination. And let us not lose sight of Haiti, which has witnessed skyrocketing levels of protection risks and internal displacement due to the spiraling armed gang violence. Around 1.5 million people are internally displaced last year. The UN designated expert on Haiti described the situation as apocalyptic. It is the end of times, he said, and it has only gotten worse. Another worrying trend, and sadly this is a continuing trend, is IDPs being given little choice but to return or disperse to areas not equipped to a safe and dignified life. I am very concerned about the fate of IDPs in Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in Nigeria, and Gaza, who have faced this impossible situation. IDPs must have information to make an informed and a voluntary choice, and conditions in proposed locations must be safe and dignified. These are a few examples of the multifaceted and growing internal displacement crisis gripping communities worldwide, where layered protection risks and abuses underscore the urgent need for concerted action and solidarity on a global scale. In my next reports to the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, I will address the implications of the erosion of respect for international humanitarian law and reconstruction in the context of mass devastation, respectively. I encourage you to follow these reports. So where do we stand as a global community, 28 years on from the establishment of the guiding principles on internal displacement? Unfortunately, the story is not all bad, and there is much good to work and to build on. We must always turn to constructive and collective action, whatever the circumstances. I am very encouraged by a growing shift from managing displacement to supporting government-led solutions that enable IDPs to rebuild their lives and to strengthen their self-reliance. By the end of 2025, more than 16 million internally displaced persons and returnees were included with government-endorsed solution strategies or frameworks. And this progress reflects both national leadership and important global institutional advances, including the work of the UN Secretary General's Special Advisor on Solutions. The UN-wide system approach to internal displacement, supported by the Internal Displacement Solutions Fund and coordinated by the Global Solutions Hub on Internal Displacement. All of this has helped to create a more coherent and sustained engagement around solutions. At the same time, progress towards solutions must not outpace our commitment to protection. Robust safeguards to protect people's rights are essential because solutions cannot be truly durable without them. If protection is sidelined, we risk undermining and even reversing the gains that have been made. Disasters and the increasingly severe impacts of climate change present also a critical opportunity to act early, addressing protection risks and laying the foundations for solutions before displacement becomes prolonged. In some contexts, and only as a last resort, once other mitigation resource measures have been exhausted, well-planned and executed relocations may be one climate adaptation measure that can contribute to solutions. But this is only possible if funding is adequate, human rights are fully respected, and communities are meaningfully involved in every stage of the process. Another encouraging development is the establishment of the Global Advisory Group, created under the UN Secretary General's Special Advisor on Solutions to Internal Displacement. The group brings 12 internally displaced leaders from different countries to advise on global policy and processes related to displacement. It is a powerful step forward in ensuring that internally displaced people are not spoken for, but speak for themselves. And I am very honored that 2 members are with us as panelists here today. To mark the anniversary of the guiding principles on internal displacement, the group issued a joint statement that we're sharing in the chat, calling on governments, UN entities, donors, partners to move beyond symbolic inclusion and to ensure that IDPs consistently engage in shaping responses and solutions. They reminded us that nothing about us, nothing about internally displaced persons should be decided without internally displaced persons. And more than a slogan, this is a principle that we must apply in practice. As citizens and habitual residents, IDPs retain the right to participate in public affairs and in decisions that affect them. IDPs are not only right holders, they are problem solvers, they are community leaders, agents of solutions. And when participation is institutionalized through formal mechanisms, through political inclusion or representative process, solutions are not only more legitimate, but they are more effective. I am continually inspired by the leadership of internally displaced people. In Ukraine, for example, I met IDPs serving on local IDP councils that bring together IDPs, civil society, local governments. These platforms demonstrate the value of co-leadership and of connecting bottom-up priorities and top-down decision-making. These same IDPs are also now engaging in global level advocacy and co-creating global events like this very conference. So supporting the meaningful participation is going to keep being a priority for me as a special rapporteur. And I look forward to engaging and to hearing from IDPs today and encourage you to share your insights and lived experiences. Your voices are not only valid, they are essential to ensuring that solutions are grounded in rights, dignity, and agency. Finally, taking the opportunity of being before such a broad and distinguished audience, I would like to challenge all of us to focus more deliberately on the how. How can we avert protection crises before they begin? How can we better identify and address protection risks early and effectively? How can we ensure that our work on durable solutions remains firmly protection-centered and grounded in human rights? In closing, I would like to sincerely thank you all for being part of this conference and for the commitment you bring to this work. The conversations that follow on self-protection and accountability and transitional justice go to the very heart of what internally displaced persons are asking for of us, to be safe today and to see justice done tomorrow. So let us carry these discussions forward with a renewed sense of responsibility to stand with internally displaced persons, to uphold their rights and dignity, and to ensure that displacement does not define the limits of their lives. Together, let us work towards a future where internally displaced people can live in safety and dignity and fully realize their potential. Thank you all, and back to you, Sarah.
Paula, thank you so much for these inspiring remarks. It would be easy these days to feel despair given aid cuts and rising numbers of displaced people, but your dedication and your enthusiasm and your call to action on the how and many other things are inspiring. Speaking of inspiring, we'll now be able to turn to our first panel, which has a number of leaders and experts that you will also hear from. To build on Paula's remarks, which we greatly appreciate. This first panel will look at how IDPs protect themselves, and we have a fantastic group that we're about to welcome. Let me first invite the moderator, Tamar Joanian, who is a senior community-based protection officer with UNHCR, to bring the group to the webinar, and we'll begin with panel one. Thank you so much.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this session, which, as just mentioned, will focus on self-protection or community protection measures, let's say, that are used by internally displaced people, particularly in contexts where local or national systems are fragile or weak. This session, I think, will give evidence to how the Special Rapporteur started the opening remarks of this session. Policies and responses should be shaped with IDPs and not for them. So we will see why this is important. As just introduced, my name is Tamar Joanian. I have been working with UNHCR for 24 years. And for the most significant part of my career, I have been focusing on community-based protection. So this session is very close to my heart, myself being from Syria and witnessing the devastating impact of displacement on the millions of IDPs in my own country. I have also seen how resilient communities can be and how they organize to protect themselves, negotiate access to humanitarian aid, and support each other with very little resources. Communities are, of course, the first respondents. They are the ones who stay when everyone else leaves. They come with an accurate understanding of the context and often implement the most effective, culturally appropriate, and sustainable protection strategies. So I am very honored to be moderating this session and to hear directly from the experienced speakers we have today. This session is 60 minutes long, and we will be hearing from 3 speakers. I will invite the participants to raise questions, or if you have any comments or you want to give your insights, to use the chats. And I want to apologize in advance, as we may not be able to get to all the questions because the time is quite limited, as you can see. We will try our best. Allow me to briefly introduce the speakers. Ahmed Mhanna is the Executive Director of Programs and Operations for Palestinian Housing Council and a member of the Global IDP Advisory Group. Thank you for joining, Ahmed. Lucky Karim is a Rohingya human rights advocate, the founder of Refugee Women for Peace and Justice, and a Refugees International Alumni Fellow. Welcome, Lucky. Ana Maria Diaz is the president of the Coalizione por Venezuela and professor of social equality and justice at the IESA Business School. Welcome, Ana Maria. Ahmed, let me start with you. People in Palestine and particularly in Gaza have experienced repeated cycles of displacement over generations. We are all following the news, of course, of what's happening. What does protection mean for internally displaced people in Gaza? And what are some of the practical strategies that you have observed communities apply to protect themselves when there are no safe options? Over to you, Ahmed.
Thank you, Tamar. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Paula. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good evening for everyone. I'm Ahmed Mhanna from Gaza, Palestine. And let me start responding to your question personally. Today, I stand before you not only as a humanitarian professional, but also as an internally displaced person. Since October 7th, 2023, I have been displaced 7 times in Gaza, in this very small area in this world. And I have been separated from my parents, my wife, my children for nearly 2 years now. So when I speak about displacement, I'm not speaking only from professional perspective. I'm speaking from life experience. It's my daily life for 3 years now. I also come from a family displaced in 1948 from our original village called El Masmiya. So for us, displacement is not temporary. It is a continuous condition. It's a chronic context. So this is not a crisis for us that started just in 2023. This is a reality that never ended. Now the question where we are discussing today, as you said, Tamar, how do IDPs protect themselves? Let me answer this directly. In Gaza, protection does not mean safety because there is no safe place. So protection becomes something else. It becomes about reducing harm, preserving dignity, and holding society together when everything else is breaking apart. Protection in the context is survival with dignity. And this is where communities step in. Because people do not wait, they act. Let me give you very concrete example. First, about hosting. Families in Gaza, especially in this situation, family opens their homes to others, relatives, neighbors, sometimes strangers, even when they have almost nothing. This is not just generosity alone. This is protection. It keeps people off the streets. It reduces exposures. It creates a minimum level of safety. Let me ask the panel and my colleagues and the participants here, how often do we formally recognize hosting families as part of the protection system? A second example, inside displacement sites, people organize themselves. They form committees. They don't wait for any response from charities. They create or organize themselves in committees, and these committees are not symbolic. They are operational. They identify vulnerable families. They know who is invisible. They know who is at risk. They organize space. They support communication. They reduce tensions. And critically, they resolve disputes. Because in crowded, fragile environment, conflict is inevitable. And these communities manage it. So my question to colleagues, are we designing our interventions to support these structures or to bypass them? They also maintain order in place where formal systems are not present. They are not waiting for governance, they are practicing it. Let me share one example about Jana. Jana is a Palestinian girl, 12 years old, from Jabalia. And I believe that most of you heard about Jabalia. It's a governorate in the north of Gaza, and this area almost completely destroyed. When the ceasefire took place and people returned to this area and stayed in a makeshift sites, and when we asked Jana about her most essential need, this child responded saying, she didn't say that she needs for food or for clothes or for candies. She said, I want to go back to school. And then what happened? How often I want to ask, how often do our responses reflect what people truly prioritize? What happened that teachers from this neighborhood volunteered, the community mobilized, the site committee coordinate with charities, and together we created the first site school in a tent. And Jana went back to school. And it was we noticed that the easiest and fastest way to bring people back to their normal life is to bring children back to the school and bring people back to their works and to maintain their livelihood activities. We also see communities offering their own land. They offering their own land to host displacement sites. People with almost nothing still creating space for others. So what is the impact of that? It enhances coordination. It stabilizes fragile environment. It improves targeting. It makes response more effective. It identifies urgent needs faster. And importantly, it maximizes the impact of the scarce resources. What else we do need as humanitarian actors? But more than that, it preserves community. And here I mean that it enhances the feeling of ownership. And without community, there is no protection. So the message is simple. Protection does not only come from outside, it starts from within. IDPs are not only in need of protection, they are providers of protection. So if it answers this question, Tamar, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for your very powerful intervention and for triggering our thinking also with the questions that you addressed to all of us. Also, thank you for sharing your personal experience and for reminding us of the power of communities when crisis hits. Your examples were, of course, very relevant, and indeed, we should all look at protection from the eyes of those most impacted by crisis. It is, as you mentioned, beyond safety. It is also about dignity, reducing harm, and community solidarity, or simply, as you said, what Jana wanted was access to education. You also encouraged us to think broader when we think about protection systems, to consider also host communities as part of those systems. So thank you so much, Ahmed. We will come back to you a bit later on your recommendations. Let me move on to Lucky Karim. Lucky, Myanmar's displacement is shaped by conflicts and by difficulties for communities to engage and stay in touch and access services. How have IDPs been able to self-organize with all those complexities taken into considerations? And what role do community support networks or structures play to ensure that people are safe, that they are connected and able to access humanitarian aid? Over to you, Lucky.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tamar. It's good to be here and for such an important discussion. Oftentimes, this topic and area is overlooked because of the split attention among other issues that we are dealing with. In Myanmar, the situation is very difficult and is a very unique area and very complex. We do have over 3.6 million displaced people, with 1.7 million at least in Rakhine State. And since the military has taken over, since the coup in 2021, the humanitarian situation has gotten worse and continued to worsen in Rakhine and across Myanmar. And with that, with the conflict that happened in 2017 as well, which then forced over 1 million people to flee home, and that means leaving their IDPs and internally displaced people in Rakhine and across Myanmar also behind. And so, given those current environment and the situation in Burma, it has been quite challenging for people inside country and outside country as well, who are in exile and displaced in neighboring countries, to even communicate with their family members back home. And so most of them have lost connection with their family members that are still in Rakhine. Is kind of on and off, depending on how situation gets and how situation change inside the country. For most recently, just weeks ago, what we are hearing from families in refugee camp in Bangladesh who still have family members back home that are internally displaced is they're not able to communicate with their family members for the last at least 3 weeks. So this does happen often, and it continues to happen as more people are in exile outside country, while they still have family members in Rakhine. There's no strong mechanism for humanitarian aid or cross-border aid to IDPs and internally displaced people in Burma. And it also has been really challenging for IDPs themselves to self-organize or get access to humanitarian aid. While protection has remained to be one of our biggest concerns, given that the airstrikes continue and bombings continue by different armed actors and armed groups inside country, and as well as military as well in Burma. Their humanitarian aid and then protection has been one of our biggest concerns. And there hasn't been a strong mechanism or strong way or any other successful ways for us or for as community members or for any other humanitarian actors for them to ensure. For people inside IDPs is more than it just unlimited time, and it's hard to predict how the future will look like, given what's going on in Burma to this day by different armed actors and military itself. But the question has been raised by their family members oftentimes is when will they be able to return to their homes without any conditions or restrictions, which hasn't been answered yet. And so that's the biggest question, and that's the question being raised by family members that we often hear. They want their IDPs to be returned to their homes safely without any restrictions or conditions from the armed actors or the military who are controlling the land. And with that, people often inside country face 10 times difficult situations and harder than those who are in refugee camps. And it's usually difficult to compare because people in the camps at least have internet access to communicate with all of us and with people that are providing services and facilities. Well, IDPs in Burma, inside country, have very limited resources and barely can even access to internet to communicate with anybody outside Myanmar. So people are very isolated and away from any other services or facilities. And people continue to die from hunger and violence in Burma. And so it has been quite challenging for them to self-organize or for us as community members to communicate with those who are still in IDPs or provide any other services, given the really hard restrictions and difficulties from different armed groups and how controlling they have been so far and not allowing any other humanitarian actor to get access to Myanmar or to provide humanitarian aid to those who are still in IDPs. Their protection is very important for us to ensure they are protected and safe and are not being targeted by any other armed wing or the military itself, while also they continue to die from hunger. So quite advocating a lot, and it has been difficult for us to ensure that they have access to humanitarian aid. As community members, for us and their families who are still in IDPs, what we do is actually, and their families, to try to find different ways and how do they stay in touch with those who are still in exile and with those who are in IDPs, at least to make sure they have connection and at least to make sure they have communication going on between their family members. Recently, there has been some attempts by different independent advocates, different donors and different members of the international community or our community members to try to see if there would be cross-border aid possible to IDPs and displaced people in Myanmar, which most of which was not successful, and it's been even difficult to do it informally to try to find different ways for cross-border aid into Rakhine. And then it is even more challenging because people still continue to cross border and to flee to Bangladesh, neighboring country, or other neighboring countries across Myanmar. While at the same time, there hasn't been any data, or there hasn't been any promise or any word from the people who are controlling the land and from the people from armed actor or the military who are in charge of those who are still in IDPs, when or if at all they will be able to return to their homes. So that's kind of where we're at this point, and it is one of the also oftentimes forgotten topic for us in the table, and it's also one of the most overlooked area where while we are focused and our attention is kind of split all over other issues in refugee camp or elsewhere. And so it has a lot to do with military and the armed actors that are in control and that are in power inside country to make a deal and be able to get a word and be sure when or if at all these people will have access to food and will have access to water and will be able to find protection and safety. And we don't even talk about education. We don't even talk about health and other issues for them while we are fighting and asking the very basic question of their protection, their safety, and access to food and water. Well, definitely it's been a pretty long time, and it's been questions about education and making sure IDPs have access to healthcare is also essential as well. But then the most basic questions have not been answered yet, and these are the questions that we are asking ourselves and advocating for. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lucky, for reflecting on the very challenging situation in Myanmar, which is also, as you said, worsening and with a lot of uncertainty about the future, and where simple coping strategies like connecting with families and loved ones are absent. And also, thank you for also bringing the point of the different situation depending on where people are, whether they are in camp settings where there are additional also challenges attached to that, and how in absence of humanitarian presence, communities are trying to be creative around finding solutions to stay in touch with each other and to access humanitarian assistance. And I think it is very clear the message that you are doing, that in your context, people have to prioritize within protection what is most pressing, and in your situation it's safety, it's food, it's access to water, and people need to make difficult choices to have access to what is more important and deprioritize some other important and pressing issues. So thank you so much, Lucky, for this reflection. Let us turn to Ana Maria. So Ana Maria, thank you for joining us. Just listening now to some of the examples and also the challenges that were mentioned by Ahmed and Lucky. And from your understanding of the situation of internally displaced persons in Venezuela, have you seen similar experiences? Why can't we say that one size fits all? And how should different groups in the community cope, especially when formal protection is weak or absent?
Thank you so much, Tamar. Actually, those are three questions in one. I'll try to do my best. But actually, a few of the remarks of my colleagues, Loki and Ahmed, resonated with me, especially since all of us know about the Venezuelan crisis because it's one of the biggest forcibly displaced crisis, but abroad. We don't think that Venezuelans are internally displaced, and actually, this is a huge thing inside our borders happening on a daily basis. At least 1 million Venezuelans has been internally displaced. But I would love to elaborate more on one of the less visible communities, which is the indigenous communities in Venezuela. Many of you might have seen or heard about the Angel Falls. It's this beautiful waterfall in Venezuela. I mean, even Disney made a movie about it. So picture this magical land that belongs to ancestral indigenous communities. And so far in Venezuela, there is this ethnic forcibly displaced crisis that no one is talking about. People who belong from years and thousands of years in those lands now are just forced to leave their homes, but it's something that even they don't recognize as internal displays. And when we see the context, many of us picture the Venezuelan crisis like people living because of economic and humanitarian crisis, but Ahmed said something that it really resonated with me. It's that displacement sometimes is not temporary. And this is the reality of many of the indigenous communities in Venezuela, because the way of they live and the way they communicate themselves and live in community, it's not the same as any other Venezuelans. They don't do registration paperwork for their lands. They just inherit it ancestrally within their families. But with the illegal mining and the irregular groups, taking several states in Venezuela, they've been forced to leave their homes and forced to live now in the main cities like Caracas or Maracaibo. And this brings also forced human trafficking, forced prostitution, the loss of their inheritance, and many other things that they cannot go back to their ancestral homes even if they want to. And of course, with this, this has been widely documented by some of the biggest NGOs advocating for this, like SOS Orinoco or civil association KPKP, which is indigenous-led. And this had led to a health collapse within the indigenous communities that don't know quite sure how to ask for help. They don't perceive themselves as internal displaced. And of course, is this protracted crisis that has multiple layers for them. And we have seen, and I would just give you a few numbers for the Warao community. It's one of the indigenous community. Over 60% of the indigenous Warao community has been now displaced of their homes. So we are witnessing an erasing of a whole ancestral ethnic community that has lost their homes, their way of living, they eat, they hunt, Also, their home is being erased because of illegal mining activities. So this is a silent genocide. And of course, it's difficult for us to advocate because they are highly in risk, not only because of the context inside Venezuela, because also it's our territories taken by illegal and irregular groups, armed groups. So it's something very difficult to address. We do our best, but I think one of the main takeaways of this is that this silent ethnocide should be showcased beyond the Venezuelans, the Venezuelan boards and borders, and also because it's not just a migration issue, it's not a displacement issue, it's the loss of ancient cultures that we cannot go back to that. I think one of the main takeaways is to spread the word when we can. I am here speaking with some numbers and figures that indigenous-led communities has provided me, and they cannot speak out inside Venezuela because they are afraid to get in prison. But this is one way that we as community can stick to ourselves and help us each other, especially in this difficult context, which is also advocating for each other, not just being indigenous to advocate for indigenous rights or being an IDP. Over to you, Tamar.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria. I think you brought a couple of very important points here. All the points were very important, but just to highlight a couple of what you mentioned, I think what you said was that, first of all, it's really important that we recognize how communities self-identify, and that we should not always assume that we are using the same basically terminology or labels when we speak about people and how they are experiencing displacement. You mentioned that maybe Venezuelans themselves don't view themselves as IDPs or are not viewed by others as IDPs. So we need to keep that in mind when we are also developing our strategies. You also brought the important point of intersectionality and how identities of displacement, indigenous status, and other characteristics overlap, with some groups in the community living displacement for prolonged times with no prospect to return to their home and lands. You touched on the particular risks and challenges, including for those who advocate for those groups and on their behalf or try to address their needs. So I think a lot of important points to keep in mind as we are also discussing protection and self-protection, that all those considerations need to be factored in. And as we started, I think the conversation, there is no one size fits all exactly. So I think with that, I will come to my next question, because we hear about the challenges, we hear about what the communities are currently doing with very limited resources. So now what would be my question for the panelists is, what are your recommendations to the governments, to humanitarian actors, to the donors, or to IDP groups themselves when it comes to self-protection and how to support self-protection? So I will flip it a bit around, and maybe we start this time with Lucky first, and then Anna, and then Ahmed. Over to you, Lucky.
Thanks. Well, I think something that I just mentioned in my earliest comment, we do need to, my strong recommendation would be for IDPs, not displaced people in Burma. These people immediately need protection to be protected from perpetrators, from actors in Burma that are operating and in power. And we need to ensure they are no longer targeted. They're already targeted, but we need to just make sure they're no longer being targeted by different actors operating inside the country. They immediately need access to humanitarian aid to be able to survive, and this includes their healthcare, their food, their water. One way or the other, humanitarian actors need to find different ways. How do they get in touch with IDPs in Burma, and how do they ensure that these people have access to humanitarian aid? And this might be different for different states and cities in Burma, depending on which city and which state are we talking about. For Rakhine, that has to go a lot with the Arakan army, who is literally and ultimately now controlling the land, and for other states it might be different for other community members. But overall in Burma, humanitarian actors need to find different ways on how do they ensure IDPs have access to humanitarian aid, food, healthcare, and water. For community members and for donors, basically for other independent donors and for other members of the international community, they need to strongly speak up about the protection and the needs for IDPs inside Myanmar as much as we do for refugees and for other people in exile. And this has to be brought up about their day-to-day challenges and their life and their situation as continues to worsen for them to this day, because otherwise it's been overlooked and it has been one of the isolated topic. As I mentioned in my earliest comment, while people have very little or least or no internet connection at all or no communication and no relationship with anybody, and it's been difficult for us to expect IDPs themselves to speak up for themselves. And so we need to find different ways and use different avenues. And people who are able to speak on their behalf should speak up more for their needs and the importance of their protection and humanitarian aid. For IDPs and for community members as a whole, what we can do and we continue to do is trying to share the very little that we have among ourselves and trying to do the best we can to make sure the families are in touch with each other and the people in touch with each other and be able to advocate who is still away from Myanmar and from IDPs for those who are stuck and kind of locked inside within the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucky. Maybe I go next to Anna and then Ahmad, and then we come back on because I think your point will complement each other. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Tamar. I think I will share just three recommendations. One is to protect those local defenders, especially those that are advocate within minorities, such as indigenous advocates, people within those communities that can speak out and share those intersectionalities, because it's different cultures, it's different contexts, that very often one size fits all interventions will not address their necessities. So we need more protection for those local defenders. And this means, provide them safe havens to speak without repercussions of getting back home. And also, it's even difficult for them to move from one city to other in the Venezuelan context. And it's something that we take for granted, but it's not. So protect those local defenders. It's a cornerstone. Also, having more cross-border interventions is, if possible. One of the indigenous communities in Venezuela, which is the Guajiro, they don't perceive Venezuelans or Colombians. For them, there don't exist borders. They belong to their ancestral homes. And sometimes you are in Colombian territory, sometimes you are in Venezuelan. So those cross-border interventions to protect them in terms of humanitarian assistance, it's critical and much necessary more than ever. And also having more cross conversations about the need to strengthen democracy and also the impact that this has in forced displacement, in the rule of law, and also preventing mass atrocities. I think those three is protect and assist cross-border and also have more in-depth conversations will be my three remarks.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Ahmed, let's go next to you, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Tamara. Before answering your question, I'm surprised how much the context when we look at the IDPs as human beings, as communities, how much it's matching between what I am experienced here in Gaza and what Lucky and Anna Maria mentioned. Just human being nature and needs and mechanisms. So what should we learn from this? Now building on what we said today, we need to confront a difficult reality. Our systems still treat IDPs as recipients, not as actors. And this is where we are getting it wrong. Let me ask directly. If communities are already leading why are they still at this margins of our decision making? This approach is inefficient, but it is, and also it is unjust. So, because it ignores existing capacities in the communities. If we are serious about protection, we must engage IDPs fully from the beginning. Assessment, planning, implementation, monitoring, evaluation of the cycle, not consultation, but partnership. Because communities know vulnerability, they know risk, they know reality. But let me be very clear. Resilience is not a solution. Resilience is what people do when systems fail them. So I ask, we are investing in resilience, or are we addressing the causes that makes resilience necessary? Protection is a right, not a favor, not optional. And specifically in Gaza, this did not start in 2023. This is a long-standing crisis, legal, humanitarian, and political crisis. So let me say that if you go now in this metaverse generation, if you went to Google or to ChatGPT, asking them about the number of the UN Security Council and General Assembly resolutions issued regarding the Palestinian case, you will find that they are countless. They are a lot, yet none of them have been implemented. So this is one of a part of the crisis. We must listen, yes, but listening alone is not enough. Let me leave you with this question. What will be different after this discussion? Because people do not need only support. They don't wait. They need rights. They need protection. They need accountability. And until that happens, they will continue to protect themselves in a world that has not fully protected them. Before I close, I want to leave my colleagues and the panel and all the participants with three very direct questions. And you can consider it as recommendations. If communities are already identifying vulnerability, maintaining order, and resolving disputes, why are they still not at the center of our decision making? The second one, if we know that protection is more than survival, that it includes dignity, education, and future, are our interventions truly aligned with what people themselves defined as protection? The third one, if displacement continues year after year in Gaza and in all the contexts we talked about today, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, what are we willing to change? Not discuss, but change, starting tomorrow. Because communities are already acting, will we adopt our systems to support them, or will we continue to work around them? So I'm inviting my colleagues in the IDP Global Advisory Group, is to start working on these questions and start to proposing or the new mechanisms or adopting the mechanisms to make the IDPs in the center of our decision-making interventions. Thank you all. Back to you, Tamar.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. I think all very important and complementary recommendations that came from all of you. Lucky you focused on the need to really address the root causes of the harm, which is also, I think, important for communities to be able to self-organize even, because as long as oppression, discrimination, and persecution continues, communities have to prioritize survival. You also spoke about ensuring access to humanitarian aid as the minimum basic that communities would need before they can focus on prioritizing other areas of protection. maybe I would come back to you, Lucky, because you spoke also about the need to continue to bring visibility to the situation of communities that are experiencing persecution. You spoke about the role of communities themselves and how they are unable to advocate for themselves because of the risk that might be exposed to. But maybe it would be good to hear a bit more from you on the role of diaspora, how they can also play that role. Anna, you spoke also the need to protect local defenders, especially those advocating for minority groups. Any recommendations that you have or examples that you have seen on how this has worked? You also mentioned cross-border interventions being very critical for the communities that are living on those border situations. Ahmed, you have touched on the need to involve IDPs from the onset and throughout as experts in their own protection. You spoke about aligning protection interventions with what the priorities of people themselves are. And then finally, you also spoke about the need to adapt systems to support IDPs in self-protection. So not working around them, not creating parallel systems, but supporting the community-led structures themselves. In the meantime, we are doing very well on time and we will be able to take some questions, but I don't know if Lucky, Anna, if you want to come back on the 2 points that I raised. Over to you.
Yeah, sure. I can. We do have some great questions as well from the audience, from people and participants that we will love to take on. To just respond to your question, I well, minority within minority, community within community, and advocates have been doing the best as they can, as I mentioned. But in particular, diaspora, I'm kind of more at least free and independent and are able to advocate more freely for those who are in exile, for who are internally displaced, and are in IDPs in Burma. And to continue doing that and to ensure they're not isolated and they're not out of the agenda, they're not out of the table. We are making sure we do stay in contact and we do stay in touch with family members and with community members for updates to make sure we can then use those experience, those updates to change our advocacy language up here, to make sure they're part of the agenda, they're part of the conversations, and to ensure that we are carrying their messages all the way to important places and delivering them to the right people at the right time. As part of the diaspora in particular, there also has been different attempts to try to get in touch with those in IDPs in Burma and to be able to organize online at least to communicate with them and to try to connect them to one another from the camp and from Burma as well. Also to try to raise our own funding and see if kind of trying to find ways on how do we make sure we are able to provide a little bit of humanitarian aid as well and access to water, and in particular for women and their needs. So there has been those things happened in the past, and we continue doing that with very little resources, and again very limited because people are kind of spread all over the places, and people are spread all over the region as well, and it's difficult to get to the ground and to cross by the border as well, while people are kind of pretty much locked and isolated inside the country, and majority of us outside the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucky. I see my image is frozen, but I hope you can still hear me. Yes, Ana Maria, you want to come in next?
Yeah,
On
thank you
the
so much.
yes.
On the question on how can local or international organizations supporting IDPs foster that sense of community. One of the things, and I want to share our personal experience in Coalición por Venezuela, it's that we kept advocating for the Venezuelan crisis, but separately, and this wasn't working. So step one is realizing that our voice is stronger if we advocate together. And in Coalición, we have over 60 NGOs, which is a large group of diversity. Some of them advocate for cultural, approaches, other for humanitarian assistance, other for civil rights. So it's a disparity itself. What IDPs has, it's a very specific topic to advocate for. So I think no matter the nationality, a group together, advocate together, and spread the word among yourselves. Because one of the things that we learn right away is that first we cannot work just someone in the Guajira border trying to raise their voice and then someone in Lima, Peru doing the same. It was all over the places and was getting us nowhere. And the second thing is learning from other experiences. And I am really honored to be here sharing the floor with Paula because she has been a trailblazer for Colombians. And it looks like something natural, but we didn't realize that many of the answers that we're seeking were in the experience of our brothers and sisters in Colombia. And we started this peer learning from other experiences within Latin America, but then expanded it from the global south. And it's something that very often we don't use, we don't see, and we should go deeper into conversations like this and learn from others' experience because can bring us quick solutions for protected problems. Over to you, Tamar.
Thank you so much, Anna. As you see in my video, I'm unable to turn it back on, just to tell you that even in Geneva, sometimes we have challenges and connection issues. So apologies, everyone. Ahmed, maybe also one of the questions, because you mentioned also the resolutions that are being decided, but are not leading to any solutions. I think there was an interesting question from Paula. Do you think that transforming the UN principles into a legally binding treaty can enhance protection for IDPs? Over to you, Ahmed.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, of course, it helps, but we all the time we are talking about the policies, strategies, and it's very important. But operationally, on the ground, it's very important to consider that there are resources available all the time on the ground. What are the national and local organizations? I've been working in this field for 20 years now. So when any crisis or any escalation takes place, suddenly we find our foreigners, colleagues comes from everywhere to support. So supporting here is a title, but actually they are leading. In this case, they are leading. Everyone comes from different contexts, from different understanding, from different background. So it takes a long time to make the team understand the needs and start intervene effectively. So what I ask here that beside turning all the principles we are talking and turn it to a legal, and this legal principles should be obligatory, not just optionals and booklets to be distributed. But we also ask and demand to invest in the local capacities, invest in the capacity building in the local NGOs, and give them the lead in the emergency and crisis time. Over to you, Tamar.
Thank you, Ahmed. I will ask the same question to Paula now, the Special Rapporteur. Paula, over to you, building on where Ahmed stopped. So what do you think if transforming the UN principles into legally binding treaty can enhance protection for IDPs? Over to you, Paula.
Yeah, thank you, Tamar. This is a long-standing debate, and I tried to answer in the chat that governments have obligations under international law and humanitarian law, and we need to stress the accountability around them committing to these obligations. So there's reluctance around a treaty. I am particularly not convinced that this will change the political will in terms of the responses. But I definitely echo what Ahmed has said and everyone has said, is investing in local capacity. This past 3 years, this has been almost my mantra everywhere I go. I mean, if this is participation, what does effective participation, what does localization mean? It means everything that we've heard today. So I just would like to say to Ahmed as well, what would change after this conference? And I think all the points you have made today have definitely echoed and given more substance to my advocacy messages in all of the settings at the global level that I have, but also knowing that all of you and you, Ahmed, and Yana, we're going to listen to her later, and Laura and others that have been part of this new push for having global advocates, IDPs at the global arena, raising your voices about what really matters, and at the end, giving examples and showing everyone and reminding everyone that if we don't put IDPs, we always say that governments have to be at the driving seat, but I think it's the IDPs that have to be at the driving seat, because we could have the best laws and we could have the best policies, but if they don't reflect all the questions that we have heard today about what really matters, and what really is happening with the leadership from IDPs, we won't get anywhere. So I would just say that is strengthening these voices, we should have more of these conferences, refugees, ODI, Georgetown, everyone. We should have more of these conferences. And please just count on me to echo all the work that you do in all the meetings that I have. I'm having one in a few minutes with the Secretary General. I'm definitely going to share with him this that I heard today. Participation, localization, meaningful engagement is really about having host communities, as well as Ahmed reminded us, in the driving seat. So that is more important than a treaty, I would say. So let's push for that together. And thank you all. It's been so inspiring to hear you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paula. I think one of the questions was already addressed in the recommendations of the panelists. It was talking about what is our role as UN, as donors, as governments to also support in situations where the source of harm is the local government. I think, Lucky, you spoke a bit to that. I don't know if anyone else wants to complement from where Lucky already shared her views. Maybe, I don't know, Anna Maria, if you have additional points to complement on that question.
I think we have all shared our thoughts. I think Paula has raised some very critical issues about us being in the driving seat. I think with the humanitarian funding crisis, this brings a golden opportunity to raise the voices, to do better, to change the system when possible. So more of these conversations from the ground, but also keeping in mind that should not be only conversations to share our experiences, but also being able to provide some recommendations, practical in policy making when possible, or how to better, address situations within the scope of localization, should be at the heart of the new interventions from now on.
Thank you, Anna Maria. I think a lot of the questions are around the same kind of point, but then also the flip side. If the government itself is the barrier, what alternative pathways can be used to ensure these communities are recognized and supported without relying on state acknowledgement? I leave it to anyone in the panel who feels that can answer this question. I don't know. Maybe I'll give you a second.
Okay, can I jump in here?
Yes, go ahead, Ahmed.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I can talk about it because the governance system in Gaza had been collapsed in the first 3-4 days of the crisis. So in 13 of October 2023, so no any kind of governance were standing in Gaza. Another important thing happened in 2023, that all the UN agencies and the ICRC team in Gaza in the midnight in 13 of October 2023 had left Gaza City and left more than 1 million persons, 1 million persons behind, and moved to the south of Gaza. Of course, it was based on communication or orders uh, from the army. And in this case, or in that moment, this 1 million plus person was only depending on the national humanitarian agencies or organizations. So we standed there, we kept our teams in operating, and only UNRWA was supporting people there, only UNRWA. And it remains for more than 6 months. I can say that within the very, very limited resources, within the very dangerous context, we lost 3 of our colleagues there in that time in Gaza, but we could provide services, shelter with eyes, and other services to more than, I'm talking now about the Palestinian Housing Council, provided service to more than 600,000 persons in Gaza City. We help people to stay in their neighborhoods. And it's one of the examples. So when the governance and all aspects of governance are weak or not exist, so we have to do it as the only organized system remains. I mean, the humanitarian system. We can stand with the local community, we can support them, we can work with them until the any kind of regime or governance take the lead again. So yeah, this is what this is my answer to this question. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ahmed. I think we can take maybe one more question. And this could be either for one of the speakers or maybe for you, Paula. So beyond the humanitarian lens, how could framing IDP advocacy and protection as a peace, human right core, and development issue change the strategies that have worked or failed, and what drives those differences?
I think that's the main shift that we have seen in the past years, and that was the approach and the I would say the game changer of the recommendations from the high level panel, because IDPs and many, all of you have said it, you are not only recipients of something, and there's been discussions about resilience in the chat and around what Ahmed has said. Human beings with desires, with choices, with expertise, with capacities, and with that lens, exclusive lens of the humanitarian, the life-saving, etc., we were losing that potential, and we were not seeing IDPs in their full, the full capacities. No, so I think that continuum is like it, I always have thought that what we used to do is like divide the people, the internally displaced, in parts. No, like if they were one person in the humanitarian phase, another person when they start moving forward in their vulnerabilities, etc., and they're the same person. You know, it's a continuum. It's a history before displacement, during displacement, after displacement, stronger after displacement, most of them, no? So I think this gives the response, as all of you have demanded in this panel, a response that is more linked to the reality and the transformational capacities and the real needs of internally displaced persons. And this changes the way the response should look like. The early engagement of development actors since the humanitarian phase, early engagement of psychosocial, mental health, identity responses, the diversity of the response. So it's a more a significant response is that what we're looking for. And I'm sure that this is going to even save money because if responses are tailored and are really directed to what people suggest and need, they're going to be more effective. No? So I think this changes everything at the end. And I do think, and I'm positive on this, that the UN, after the Secretary General's action agenda and the special advisor, is starting to understand this. And I've seen that governments are starting to understand this. But what we need now is what we already said, more support to local capacities, more support to organizations, more support to raise the voices of all of you here. I would say that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paula, for that. I don't know if we have 2 more minutes, maybe one last question, and maybe we can ask the 3 main speakers to each give one thought on that one. So the question is, as the funds are shrinking around the world and displaced people are increasing day by day, especially in the Middle East and Africa, what concrete strategies can be put in place to save lives of IDPs? If each one of you can give maybe one thought. We start with maybe first Lucky.
Thanks. And again, this might be different in different contexts. For us, I guess this is beyond humanitarian and it's more than food and water. It's more about protection. It's more about finding different avenues to explore in different ways, and solutions to protect people while they're on the ground. And the best way to recognize them and to support them, to provide direct assistance and direct support is supporting the community-led group, community-led organization, local organizations, and local actors and local leaders that are still on the ground. Because that's the best way to protect and to mobilize and organize people while they are displaced. And it's beyond humanitarian. Is more to do supporting the people that are on the ground and affected more directly instead of waiting for something to be sustained and for others from outside to come to the ground and to hit the ground and support them, which usually takes a long time. And so that might be the best and the direct way of going through this process and supporting the people that are directly affected on the ground. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Lucky. Ahmed, over to you.
We have to answer this question. We have to split between 2 contexts: the emergency context and the early recovery context. In the emergency context and within these crazy times, we have to prioritize our interventions based on real and essential needs we get from the community. Then this little amount of funds can make a difference in the communities. In the early recovery phase, I believe that one word can be the solution: localization. We can invest this fund to make solutions in the communities, what helps to restore the production in the community. The socio-economic cycle start to turn, to engage, and this can support the educational system, the health system, of course, as much as with the resources we have. We have experience in that since June 2024, the importing tents to Gaza was very few because of the restrictions. And we had around 70,050 tents, 70,050 tents needed for already assist households. So we took the initiative from the community and we started to manufacture this makeshift tents, what let's say that meet the minimum standards of shelter in cooperation with the shelter cluster working in Gaza. And now I can say that after 6 or 7 months, we already almost covered the needs. It generated around 24,000 job opportunities from the IDP sites. And of course, they got skills. So it's one of the solutions that to localize the resources, human resources, and the funds by using the local resources, and it could be one of the solutions. Over.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ahmed. Ana Maria, one last thought from your end.
I think with the humanitarian failure, one of the big lessons learned is that we get to see how fragile protection is. So I think this is the moment to strengthen protection interventions and protection structures. But it is also to rethink in more cost-efficient structures. And I bring again the localization principle because it's one of the avenues in which we can achieve protection structures with people in the center, but also be more effective. So it's time also for the soft diplomacy. And we all can be diplomats in some way or the other. So let's find solutions together and also be with the people in the center of these discussions.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria, Lucky, and Ahmed. I think you gave very important and insightful reflections. You gave us a lot to think about. Unfortunately, the time is short. We want to hear more from you. Sorry about my technical issue with the camera, but I'm happy that people got to see you and hear you. We will conclude this part of the discussion, and I will thank you all. We have a 5 minutes break before our next session, where we will hear from David Cantor about the new publication of the handbook on internal displacement. Back to you, Sarah, and thank you for all the speakers.
Tamar, thank you for doing a masterful job moderating. As she's mentioned, we'll take 5 minutes and then be back online with the next session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yana Lubimova. Today I have an honor to invite our next cohort of speakers to present the fundamental work, the Oxford Handbook of Internal Displacement. For me, it was a great responsibility to be part of this project as the author of the foreword. Thank you a million for Professor Cantor and all the team. I see this handbook as our tool for ensure that IDP voices are heard at the global level. It is especially meaningful for me today to give the floor to the author of this handbook for the very first presentation, Professor Dr. Cantor, editor of the handbook and founder and director of Refugee Law Initiative. His vision made it possible to structure this vast body of knowledge. Professor Elizabeth Ferris, research professor at the Institute of the Study of International Migration of Georgetown University, and Dr. Utz Pape, lead economist of the World Bank. And I would like to pass the floor of the driving force behind the project, Professor Dr. Cantor. Sincerely welcome to the floor.
Many thanks indeed, Yana, and a very good morning and afternoon to you all. It was such a pleasure, Yana, to read the foreword, the very powerful foreword that you wrote for this volume. And I really encourage everyone to read that, whether you read it in the original language or in the English translation. Both are there at the very front of the book. A really big thanks to the organisers of the conference for the invitation to change gear from that fantastic session that we just heard, to talk a little bit about academic and practitioner research on the broader issue of internal displacement. I'd like to also give special thanks to Utz, one of the other editors of the volume, for joining us today, and of course to Beth Ferris for stepping in at the last moment when our third speaker, Paula, was called urgently away at short notice. Thanks very much, Beth, for doing that. About the book is that it is the result of a major collaborative project and results from 2 years of learning and exchange amongst all of the participants. I should like to start by recognising the project leads, and they include Megan Bradley, Winifred Akizi, Natalia Baal, Utz Pape, and we were very ably helped by Melissa Wehmeyer as well. So fantastic to have that team working together to push this forward. As co-editors, though, we were delighted to work with over 70 authors in writing up 45 chapters, over 600 pages of text. But you'll be pleased to hear that although we had over 45 chapters, each of those chapters is very manageable and readable at about 5,000 to 6,000 words each. So whatever the topic is you're looking for, you can look at the index, you can find what it is, and very quickly get acquainted with the real depth of knowledge that each of our authors brings. Now, those 70 authors were from across the world there, each expert researchers in the particular topic that they were writing on, and they reflect a very, very wide range of backgrounds, both academic and practitioner, established and early career, and expertise reflecting a very wide range of both disciplinary and country backgrounds. So I'm really encouraging you to read it, not just for the content, but the range of views that you'll see on display there. Why did we think this book was needed in the first place? Well, as we've just heard, the displacement of people within their own countries due to crises such as conflict, disasters, and the effects of climate change is really a major contemporary challenge, and it elicits global concern as well as that of the communities affected about how to protect and assist and survive in these contexts. The vast scale and impact of internal displacement poses far-reaching questions about the IDP field, but also for broader key debates around humanitarian aid, development, migration, sovereignty, rights, citizenship, identity, and social change. But the problem is that knowledge of the issue is fragmented and highly dispersed across a range of academic and policy domains, and the lack of a central reference point both reflects and contributes to the ongoing low profile of internal displacement in research and practice. So what does the handbook add to all of that? Well, it was conceived with the idea of addressing these challenges of coherence in the IDP field by providing a central point of reference that serves three main objectives. The first of those is to identify internal displacement as a distinctive field of research and practice. The second is to advance the recognition in parallel fields and disciplines of the importance of internal displacement to those many key debates that I've just mentioned. And thirdly, to raise the profile of internal displacement as a vital concern for both research and policy agendas. As a result, the book covers an extensive range of topics across its 45 chapters, and each one of those not only discusses and provides insight on key debates, it also points to future directions and questions for research and practice on that theme. As you can see, it's organised around 8 main parts. Part 1 presents different conceptual understandings of internal displacement, not just from the policy perspective, but from a range of the most relevant disciplinary standpoints, including philosophy, political theory, history, law, geography, forced migration studies, and so on. The second part of the book shifts gear and explores the different drivers of internal displacement, conflicts, disasters, and so on, embedding them in their broader social, political, and historical context. The third part of the book again changes gear to address the major internal displacement dynamics and population trends in different regions of the world. The fourth part, to which Dr. Uts-Pape will speak in just a moment, highlights the material, social, and economic consequences of displacement, thinking about poverty, health, education, politics, and land for the displaced. Part 5 follows on from that by addressing the lived experiences of internal displacement, underscoring the agency, as we've just heard, of displaced persons and affected communities in making sense of and dealing with the phenomenon of displacement. Part 6 is perhaps a more traditional part, addressing key aspects of IDP assistance and protection, including legal frameworks, institutional responses, and policy and operational challenges, such as self-protection. Part 7 addresses, if you like, the end of displacement and so-called durable solutions for IDPs, offering compelling insights into how long-term solutions have been handled and hindered in practice. And finally, the last part interrogates the crucial role of data in understanding and responding to internal displacement. I hope that gives a sense of the utility of the handbook and its contribution to scholarship and practice, but you don't need to take my word for it. If you go onto the website, which I'll put on the screen and in the chat in a moment, you can see there that there are a number of reviews that the book has already garnered from both scholars and practitioners in which they emphasize this as a key reference document. Indeed, as editors, we believe that the handbook contributes new theoretical approaches and insights to our understanding of internal displacement, both through its wide-ranging interdisciplinary examination of the theme, but also by developing scholarship from the global south as well as the north to offer a clearer conceptualization of internal displacement more generally. It is our ambition that the handbook represents a handy and accessible and readable resource for both established and early career researchers and, of course, for hard-pressed practitioners working in displacement contexts. In tandem, we hope the book will also excite real interest amongst colleagues in established academic disciplines and in parallel policy domains to think carefully about how internal displacement plays into many of their key concerns. So for those interested in accessing the book, here are a series of links you can see on the screen. If you're interested in purchasing the book, or if via library logins and so on, you're able to gain access to the online publication. If, of course, you have neither of those things and you're still interested in particular chapters, do feel free to drop me a line. I'm going to leave that on the screen for a moment whilst we transition to the more important part of this session, and we hear from Dr. Uts-Pape, who's the lead economist at the World Bank, who'll share some of the key points from this work in the section that he led on the impacts of internal displacement. After that, we'll have some reflections from Beth Ferris, and if there's time, a few questions and comments. So over to you, Uts.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David. I also have one slide that I can share. I don't know whether this works. And so let me really focus on the part 4, because like David already very nicely sort of positioned where this stands. Part 4 itself asks a simple question, but it's a powerful question, I think. What are the consequences of internal displacement? And not just for the displaced people, but also for societies and systems as a whole. And you'll see, I come back later, especially to this aspect, that it's not like that you don't want to have a very insulated view, but it's really about looking at the systemic impacts as well. The section brings together 6 chapters, as you've just seen. It focuses on the different core domains. It's poverty, food security, health, education, housing, land, property as one chapter, and then politics. And so one of the unifying insights across all of these chapters is that internal displacement is not just a short-lived shock. I mean, I think we probably all know, but I think for the handbook, it is still important to really also emphasize this point again. The effects of displacement are often systemic, cumulative, and long-lasting, and they extend well beyond humanitarian needs. And I think that's really one of the important lessons to come out of the chapter. The chapter on poverty, from the part of the handbook. The chapter on poverty itself shows that internal displacement is consistently associated with worse economic outcomes, both for IDPs and also often for the host communities. Displacement disrupts livelihoods, severe social and economic networks, and pushes households into precarious and often informal activities. One of the striking findings is that even when IDPs move to areas with more economic activities, for example, cities, this does not automatically translate into better welfare outcomes. There are many barriers to labor markets, there's a lack of assets, insecure housing, and all of this means that displacement frequently deepens poverty and also alleviates inequality. Increases inequality rather than alleviating it. The food security chapter highlights how displacement disrupts entire food systems, not just household consumption. Loss of land, livestock, and access to markets combines with rising prices in host areas and dependence on aid. One of the important points is that food insecurity among IDPs often persists long after initial displacement, as I've mentioned at the beginning, and that especially in the protected situations. This makes it a structural development problem rather than a temporary crisis response issue. The health chapter documents elevated risks across multiple dimensions: higher mortality, greater exposure to communicable diseases, worsening of chronic conditions, and severe mental health burdens linked to trauma and stress. What is particularly salient is the between displacement and the weak health systems. In many contexts, health impacts are less about displacement per se than about overcrowding, legal invisibility, and barriers to accessing already strained services. Again, pointing to the systemic rather than episodic effects. On education, the evidence shows that displaced children face multiple reinforcing barriers: damaged infrastructure, teacher shortages, language and documentation constraints, and frequent mobility. Which is, of course, relatively negative in the context of displacement. One nuanced insight is that displacement can sometimes open new educational opportunities, especially in urban areas, but these gains are highly uneven and often offset by lower completion rates and learning outcomes. Over time, displacement risks translating directly into lost human capital over the whole life cycle. The housing, land, and property chapter arguably sits at the core of many of the other impacts. Insecure tenure, unresolved land claims, and repeated eviction risks undermine livelihoods, social integration, and access to services. A key takeaway is that housing, land, and property issues are not merely legal or technical. They shape whether displacement becomes protected, whether returns are sustainable, and whether social tensions escalate. In several contexts, unresolved housing, land, and property disputes contribute directly to renewed conflict or political instability. And here you can see how this can become negative feedback loops. Finally, the chapter on politics shows that internal displacement reshapes local power relations, political participation, and conflict dynamics. IDPs are often politically marginalized, unable to vote, underrepresented, or instrumentalized by the elites. At the same time, there are important counterexamples where displaced groups organize, advocate, and influence policymaking. So this suggests that displacement can also generate new forms of political agency, though usually under very constrained conditions. Taken together, Part 4 makes 3 broader points. First, internal displacement has cross-sectoral impacts on poverty, human capital, food systems, health, and governance, and all of them are deeply interconnected. This is why I think it's great that in the handbook, all of them are basically within one part of the handbook and really seeing and making visible the cross-references between the chapters. Second, these impacts are often long-term and path-dependent, which means short-term humanitarian responses alone are insufficient, which is also one of the threats, I think, that lead throughout the handbook. And third, the evidence consistently suggests that addressing the impacts of displacement requires integrating development, governance, and legal approaches, and not just thinking about protection and assistance. So in that sense, Part 4 really reinforces the broader argument of the handbook. Internal displacement should be understood as a central development and policy challenge and not as a peripheral one. Let me stop here with thanking again the authors of these insightful chapters, and I hope you are excited about reading these chapters in more detail. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I'm going to hand over now to Beth. Thank you very much for stepping in at the last moment. Beth, of course, authored the chapter on local integration, and it would be really good to hear your views just about relevance to practitioners and solutions questions more generally.
Yeah, I'm going to make two comments. First of all, as David mentioned in the beginning, this was a collaborative research project. I've worked on tons of research projects in my life, and a lot of them are just carried out by yourself. But this one, we really went back and forth. So I was writing the chapter on local integration, which was part of the solutions part of the book. And it was really useful to talk with the folks writing about returns. Well, is reintegration of returnees similar to integration of IDPs and then for people settled elsewhere? So we went back and forth. And I think it's really kind of unique. And kudos to the organizers for setting up this long 2-year process where we really got to work with each other and learn from each other. We need much more of that in the academic side. And secondly, I've worked, probably spent more years as a practitioner than as an academic, working with refugees, IDPs, and others, and lots of different humanitarian situations. And frankly, during that time, I saw a lot of academic research is not very relevant. Sorry, academics, but a lot of it seems very theoretical when you're facing these urgent day-to-day needs. And yet, I think that there's a lot that practitioners can learn from this volume. Some of the insights that are in these chapters, as I've just mentioned about, internal displacement as an issue related to poverty and how do we integrate that into poverty frameworks and development programming. The chapter I wrote on local integration cites research based on thousands and thousands of interviews with IDP households about their future intentions. And we found quite surprisingly that, most IDPs don't plan to return home. Well, that has enormous policy implications for governments who are often assuming that IDPs will return and how to facilitate that when, our research suggests that, policymakers and program folks need to be thinking much more about how do we ensure that people can live lives of dignity and acceptance and relate to host communities, and host communities can benefit as well. So there are lots of practical implications in these chapters. And I think, David, the way it's organized, where you can go to one particular chapter or issue and read these, well, for academics at least, relatively short chapters, is certainly very practical for people working in the field. So kudos to the organizers, and thanks for sending us the discount code. I mean, it's an expensive book, but most of, a lot of libraries get this, and I think you can access it in a lot of different ways. So it was great to be a part of this project, and I can't wait to read the chapters I haven't read yet.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's really great to hear those reflections, and it really was a very collaborative process, and that was both enjoyable, I think, for all of us, but the outcomes, I think, vastly improved as a result too. I'm going to hand back to Jana, who I know is timekeeping for this session. I think we're pretty much spot on the allocated time, but if there is time for questions, I'm sure myself, Utz, and Beth will be very pleased to answer them.
Thank you, David. I know one of our previous speaker have a question for you, actually. Ahmed, if you can welcome to on board.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for all the participants on this great job. I think that we are really in need to for this to standardize the concepts and the meanings of all aspects of displacement. My question is where this handbook focuses and where it's or addresses the social impacts of displacement. Within the different contexts, we noticed, I work in Aleppo in Syria with IDPs in Yemen and in Gaza. And I noticed that there are common impacts on the social boundaries and social ethics and cultures within the displaced people, impacted by changing the demography of a certain area. So how it focuses it, how it addresses it, and then we can think how to work with this dimension. Thank you.
Do you want me to come in on this?
Why don't you give a first response, and I may well follow up, and Beth, of course, you're very welcome.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it gives me also like a chance to know. Obviously, my 5-minute overview of these chapters do not reflect how rich the chapters actually are. So I think part 4 does address a lot of the social impacts, but always sort of like categorized by the different social domains like poverty, livelihoods, food security, health, education, housing, land and property, and then of course political participation. I think this within these chapters, when you like read through them, it like shows how displacement can reshape the social relations, the access to services, and the vulnerability over time. Now, this is sort of like the more impact direct questions, but then if you look, for example, in part 5 of the handbook, you also can find a lot on the lived experiences. You can find on identity, on belonging, also on the regional dynamics and the solutions. So I think in general, the handbook touches on these topics in a lot of different parts, but I think part 4 and then part 5 are really the main parts that center on this.
I don't think there's anything I can add to that very comprehensive response, except to say that it appears in other sections as well. If you look at the regional sections, the way in which those sorts of social questions and social change dynamics play out are examined in relation to different regions of the world. And that actually produces some quite interesting findings as well. So do delve in and you'll see that it's a theme that runs through the book itself. Change is certainly something very
interesting. It's also central to local integration, the social dynamics of a community. And also this somewhat less tangible aspect of a feeling of belonging, of being at home, of being part of a community is essential and frequently isn't captured by a lot of our programs.
Yeah, I think we've got a specific chapter in homemaking, so that would also be a good point of reference. I'm sorry we're just basically giving you a reading list, but you did open it up with that question. Thank you very much, Ahmed. It's a very good question.
Thank you, colleagues. And Professor Cantor, if I may, I have one question for you. As the editor of this handbook, what are the 3 key gaps on international law on internal displacement? What you should address through this publication?
So what key gaps of international law specifically?
Yeah, on internal displacement. Yes, there is 3. I know this is a big bottleneck of international law gaps, but 3 cases.
Yeah, I'm going to address your question slightly tangentially, Jana. And I think there are maybe 2 things I'd point you towards here. And this is really to showcase the work of colleagues. The first of those is that alongside this handbook at the Internal Displacement Research Centre here at the RLI, we've been publishing a series of short papers called Internal Displacement in a Changing World. And it's really thinking about how are the legal structures, how the institutional structures, how the patterns of displacement, how's the response changing in a world where the global politics are changing, where conflict dynamics are changing, where humanitarian aid is being cut, where we're thinking much more about questions of localization and so on. And what does that mean for internal displacement? So if you look on the platform that we run, which is called Researching Internal Displacement, there's a whole load of really nice short, sort of 1,000 to 2,000 word pieces from some range of thinkers. They're all open access, and some of those deal with kind of the legal gaps that you're talking about, and others are interested in gaps in access and so on. So I suppose that would be one thing. The second thing I'd just point towards is on that platform, a colleague from Latin America, Beatriz Sanchez, and myself published a short article last year saying, is it time to update the guiding principles on internal displacement? So I'll leave you with that thought-provoking question, and maybe that tangentially answers the very difficult technical legal question that you've just asked. But thank you for that indeed.
Thank you, David. And now my next question for the Dr. Us Pape. You work with one of the biggest donor organizations. Do you see practical application of this academic foundation on real humanitarian work?
Yeah, perfect. No, that's a great question. I mean, I must admit, I've worked on the handbook, not as much in my capacity of working for the World Bank. So it's like a little bit separate, but like if you ask this question, or like, where do I see the World Bank basically supporting and coming in this effort? I mean, the one side that I'm particularly also very interested in, and this is also what brought me to this topic of displacement, is really on the nexus between data and measuring, and from there, to draw conclusions and basically try to improve what can be done for like displacement. And I mean, one of my big opinions is what you don't measure, you don't see, and what you don't see, you tend to ignore. And I think the handbook has also like a dedicated section, a dedicated part just on data. And I think that is really helpful. And this really points out that, well, I think in the last couple of years, we did make a lot of progress in collecting more data, better understanding the exact situation of IDPs, but there's also still a lot to be done. In terms of the World Bank, together with UNHCR, we do have the joint data center that is in Copenhagen. And that's like sort of like a joint venture driven by both organizations and really focused on not only collecting data for IDPs in general, but also to collect and integrate IDPs more specifically in national household surveys, because often national household surveys are not stratified. So you're not going to be able to say something specific for displaced groups, and integrating them by design into these surveys, I think is really, I mean, it's very technical at the beginning, but I think when you look at the results, it can really inform policies. It can really inform program design, both at the level of the government, at the level of humanitarian institutions, and of course, also like really advocating for better responding to it from the angle of development. And that's exactly, you know, like one of the main points that the part on impacts makes.
Yeah, thank you for this. Me personally fully agree with you. We have one more question for Elizabeth. This is already a question from our chat, from our participants. I know you have worked extensively on the localization aspects on this handbook, and our participants wondering to ask you, does the handbook cover cases where IDPs return to their home communities in the post-conflict scenarios?
Yes, definitely. And there's a whole chapter on returns, another one on settlement elsewhere. And it's a theme, I think, that runs throughout the book and other sections as well. You know, what is the role of IDPs when they return? You know, as that said, sometimes they have more educational opportunities and displacement than they had back home. Can they use that education and skills to help their communities recover? You know, what role can they play in, I hate to say post-displacement situations, I think is central and really deserves more attention.
Thank you, Beth. And my last question to all of you from our chat also, what is the role of governments and agencies, also NGOs, IDP lead NGO, helping rebuild or support their home communities contexts years after displacement?
If I can answer just very briefly, I think one of the key themes that does run throughout the book is the importance of a range of different actors in addressing situations of displacement. I mean, obviously, displaced people themselves often find solutions in their own hands, but the role of the communities that they live in, the communities that they return to, wider national society in structuring those kinds of opportunities, and also the role of international NGOs, UN agencies, and so on. All of those things, I think, run through the book and emphasize the complexity that can sometimes arise in terms of thinking about, you know, who is taking a lead in relation to the kinds of issues that you've just raised. Beth, would you like to add to that?
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Your skillful chairing and your probing questions into the participants David. As well.
Thank you, but maybe this is a good time to wrap up to your lunch event in London, 7th of May.
Thank you very much. Yes, we'll look forward to seeing you on the 7th of May, where we're launching this to a humanitarian audience with ODI, the Overseas Development Institute, and of course the RLI as well. So if you're in London, do join us.
Thank you all our speakers. Thank you, David, Beth, and Ope for your contribution for this rich discussion. I would like to pass the floor to Sarah. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Jana. I think we all have some excellent reading in our future. Very excited for this publication to come out and for a great discussion. In the interest of time, we're going to transition now immediately to our next panel, which is a fantastic group. Will be moderated by Dr. Megan Bradley from McGill University. You'll see our next group of speakers coming up on screen. And once everyone is online, I think we have everyone, we'll pass to Megan to introduce the panel and carry on.
I'm Megan Bradley. I'm a professor of political science at McGill University in Montreal, and it's a pleasure to have the chance to be with so many old friends for this conversation today, and also new colleagues whose perspectives we're looking forward to hearing about. So the focus for this second panel is questions of displacement, justice, and accountability. And I think this is such a relevant topic for the present moment. We're at a time when displaced people face increasingly systematic and severe human rights violations, which raises the question of what justice can look like, what it can achieve in contexts that are affected by large-scale displacement, and how do we promote accountability for displaced people, how displaced people themselves really serve as leaders in struggles for justice and accountability. So just to start out with, the conveners asked me to say a few quick words about a concept that will be quite central to our conversations today, and that's the notion of transitional justice. So everyone who's gathered here today, of course, understands the notion of internal displacement and how important it is to think about people who are uprooted within their own countries. But the concept of transitional justice isn't necessarily one that's part of everyone's vocabulary. Broadly speaking, this is a term that refers to a whole range of different mechanisms that are used by societies that are either emerging from or sometimes still actually going through large-scale human rights violations, and that are trying to achieve increased justice and accountability towards the survivors of those violations. So we've seen these mechanisms often used in the context of transitions to democracy, for example, after the end of the Cold War, after the end of apartheid, but we also see them used in contexts of large-scale war, whether that's civil war or internal conflicts. So the measures that are used are numerous. They include trials, whether we're talking about international trials or national courts. We can also think about iconic mechanisms like truth and reconciliation commissions, the possibility of compensation programs, especially relevant to internally displaced people, are restitution programs. So is it possible for displaced people to get their homes and properties back? We can also think about mechanisms like apologies and commemoration. There's a whole range of different ways in which these transitional justice mechanisms can be brought to bear on displacement situations, usually with the goal of trying to prevent future violations, so encouraging accountability, and also fostering a degree of reconciliation, which is, of course, a very difficult term that isn't very easily defined. So as we engage in this conversation, I just wanted to flag that the Special Rapporteur on the human rights of IDPs, both the current mandate holder, Paula Gaviria, and also past mandate holders have done some really important work to center this question of transitional justice in their reports, and in particular, its connections to the resolution of displacement through durable solutions. It's also an issue that has been explored in research, and I thought I would just, as a researcher, flag a couple past projects. One is, I'm also an old school person, so I'm going to show you the actual hard copies, and Aliza from Refugees International will kindly put the links in the chat. So this book, Transitional Justice and Displacement, is super relevant for our conversation today. It was led by colleagues at the International Center for Transitional Justice and also the Brookings Institution. And it looks at some of these key mechanisms like trials, compensation programs, restitution programs, and analyzes their relevance to displaced populations. Another book is one called Forced Migration, Reconciliation and Justice that really tries to bring forward the perspectives of policymakers and practitioners, particularly from the Global South, in these conversations. So these are both projects from now about 10, 12 years ago, and I think it's really encouraging to see a revitalization of interest in this topic. And so without any further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to our first speaker. Laura Borrero is a friend and colleague, a remarkable IDP leader from Colombia. Her grandfather was killed by the FARC when she was just 1 year old, and since that time, her family has been displaced multiple times. And Laura has emerged as, I think, a real leader in a new generation of IDP flag bearers in Colombia. She is part of the national roundtables for victims of the conflict, and recently completed her MA in human rights at the University of Madrid. So Laura, we'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. I would like to thank you for the invitation to this panel and for the opportunity to participate in such an important space for those of us who work for the rights of internally displaced persons every day. Colombia has experienced more than 6 decades of internal armed conflict, resulting in over 9 million internally displaced people. This reality has compelled the country to develop responses that go beyond humanitarian assistance. And one of the most significant has been the development of a transitional justice model. In this regard, it's important to clarify that in Colombia, for displacement is not understood as a collateral effect of war, but as a massive and systematic violation of human rights. This recognition has been essential in placing displaced persons at the center of justice process. So the Colombian transitional justice model, particularly after the 2016 peace agreement, is characterized by its comprehensive nature. Unlike other peace processes in Colombia, it was established from the outset that there could be no peace without justice, but also no justice without true or recognition of victims. For this reason, the agreement designed a transitional justice model that balances these elements. So the system in English translate is known as the comprehensive system of true justice, reparation, and non-repetition. It's broad and innovative, and it's not limited to the judicial sphere, but seeks to address in a comprehensive way both the causes and consequences of the conflict. So within this system has 3 main institutions were created. First, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, which is the judicial component. Its role is to investigate, prosecute, and sanction those responsible for the most serious crimes committed during the conflict, including those related to the forced displacement, and unlike the ordinary justice system. This model emphasizes the acknowledgement of true and reparation for victims. And the second institution is the True Commission, which had an extrajudicial and temporary mandate. Also, it's finished already, and its role was to clarify what happened during the conflict, identify patterns of violence, and give voice to victims. And the 3 institution is the Unit for the Search of Persons Deemed Missing, which has an humanitarian focus, and its role is to search for persons who disappear in the context of the conflict. So these institutions have played a key role in making internal displacement visible, not only like a a statistical figure, but a practice used within the context of the conflict. And one of the most important contributions of this model, at least in my opinion, has been the construction of truth. Through testimonies from victims, including thousands of displaced persons, it has been possible to document how displacement was strategically used by different armed actors. And this not only dignifies the voices of victims, but also helps to understand the root causes of the phenomenon. So in terms of justice, the Colombia model has sought to establish responsibility not only at the individual level, but also at collective and structural level. This is particularly relevant for displacement, which often doesn't result from isolated event, but from complex dynamic of violence, land dispossession, and economic and territorial control. However, one of the most innovative and also, of course, most challenging elements of the Colombian model is the participation of victims. Colombia understands that it's not possible to speak of transitional justice without the active participation of those who have experience in the conflict. Displaced persons have participated in the development of reports, in hearings, in process of acknowledgement of responsibility, and have contributed to the recognition of displacement as one of the most serious violations within the armed conflict. And nevertheless, it's also important to acknowledge that this model faces significant challenge. On the one hand, there are limitations in implementation. Many of the legal provisions do not fully translate into concrete change in the life of displaced person. On the other hand, participation faces challenge such as lack of autonomy, institutional dependency, and in some cases, risk to safety of leaders. And furthermore, despite the progress made in transitional justice, the country continues to experience new displacement. This raises an important reflection. Transitional justice cannot be understood solely as a process focused on the past. In this sense, in my opinion, Colombia has experienced over several lessons. I'm going to talk about three. First, the recognition displacement as a violation of rights is essential to ensure a comprehensive response, not only humanitarian ones. Second, that transitional justice must be broad and well articulated, capable of addressing not only individual responsibilities, but also the structures have allowed displacement to perceive. And third, that the participation of displaced person is not a complementary element, but an essential condition for justice process to be legitimate and effective. So to conclude, I would like to highlight a central area. Displaced persons are not only recipients of transitional justice. We are active agents in its constructions. Our voices have made it possible to reconstruct the truth, demand accountability, and transform the way we understand the conflict and its impact. Thank you very much for the space.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Laura. Your closing point about how justice can't be justice without the active involvement of displaced people and other leaders, other survivors and victims of conflict, I think is just an essential one for this conversation. I now want to turn to Tatiana Shevchenko, who is going to speak with us about the work of collecting evidence for the purposes of advancing justice and accountability. In the context of discussions around internal displacement, we think about so often the responsibility of the states in which IDPs are located, but the experience in Ukraine, I think, is so important because it prompts us to think about many different kinds of justice and accountability, including in relation to other states, in this case, Russia, which have been fueling a massive displacement crisis. So it's a real pleasure and an honor to have Tatiana here today. She holds a PhD in international law and is the first deputy head of the State Archival Service of Ukraine. And she's also an associate professor and chair of the Ukrainian National Subcommittee for UNESCO on memory in the World Program. So Tatiana, thank you for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Megan, thank you for your introduction. Dear colleagues and participants, it's a great honor for me to speak today and represent the State Archival Service of Ukraine. Today, my presentation focuses on displacement records as evidence and the role of the State Archival Service of Ukraine in transitional justice. Next slide, please. Russia's war against Ukraine has become not only a challenge to state independence and territorial integrity, but also a serious test for institutional resilience and the legal system. In the context of a full-scale invasion, Ukraine faces the task not only of defending its statehood, but also of preserving the truth about crimes committed during this war. This includes systematic documentation of acts of armed aggression, war crimes, crimes against humanity, mass internal displacement, the suffering of civilians, and example of human resilience. Next slide, please. In this context, archives are no longer only institutions that store information about the past. They have gained a new role, preserving evidence about events and directly contributing to the protection of human rights, the documentation of violation of international humanitarian law, and the development of transitional justice. Because of this transformation, records related to internal displacement have gained special importance. In the framework of transitional justice, such records are not only administrative recognition of the status of IDPs. Every recorded fact of displacement can become a part of future legal framework of accountability. Next slide, please. Internal displacement in Ukraine has been systematic since 2014, and since 2022, it has reached unprecedented levels. At the same time, state policy in this area remains institutionally fragmented. The situation is further complicated by the absence of a single body responsible for developing and implementing a comprehensive state policy on IDPs. Responsibility in this area has been repeatedly transferred between different ministries, leading to fragmentation of document database. From an archival perspective, this means there are no unified sectoral list of documents related to internal displacement and no clearly defined retention periods. Such gaps create long-term risks of document loss. Next slide, please. Against this background of fragmentation and risk of document loss, the question arises: how has the archival system responded to these challenges during the war? The full-scale invasion in 2022 became a turning point for the archival sector. In these conditions, the leadership and coordination role of the State Archival Service of Ukraine became stronger. In December 2024, the government of Ukraine adopted the strategy for the protection of documentary heritage as a guarantee of Ukrainian statehood and national identity. One of the key priorities is the creation of a unified state platform, Archive of the War for Independence. This platform is designed to support the long-term preservation of documentary evidence collected since 2014. Its main goal is to ensure that evidence related to armed aggression, annexation, and occupation is properly preserved and can be used in national and international legal proceedings. In September 2025, in the State Archival Service of Ukraine receives cross-sectoral coordination powers in this field. Next slide, please. An important part of this effort was the establishment of an interagency working group in October 2025. Its role is to coordinate actions between different institutions and ensure that this evidence is preserved in a systematic and consistent way. The working group includes representatives of state institutions, such as the Office of the Prosecutor General, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and among others. Most importantly, this is not only a state body. NGOs are also actively involved in this work. Their participation ensures broader expertise, particular experience in documenting the war since 2014, and more inclusive approach to preservation. Civil society organizations have built an independent and powerful documenting ecosystem in Ukraine since 2014. And next slide, please. In February 2026, the Hub for Potential Contributor for the Archive of the War for Independence was launched. It is the first platform in Ukraine created to unite documentation organizations and coordinate their efforts. It brings together both civil society and state institutions. As of April 2026, 26 initiatives have joined the Hub, including leading human rights organizations, museums, libraries, and educational institutions. And next slide, please. Based on this analysis of the questionnaires submitted by organizations to the Hub, we can make several observations about how the rights of IDPs are being documented. In Ukraine, we see a strong network of civil society organizations working in this area. Some of them focus specifically on collecting testimonies of displacement through interviews, surveys, or audio recordings. Others include IDPs in their broader work on war crimes, such as forced displacement, deportation, and violation of civilians' rights. The amount of collected materials is already very significant. It includes thousands of interviews and documented cases, both inside Ukraine and abroad. These testimonies cover the full experience of displacement, from leaving home to adapting to new conditions. At the same time, we face an important challenge: how to preserve this information in the long term. Because these materials are sensitive and confidential, there are certain challenges involved in transferring them into the state archives. This is why we need better cooperation between the state, civil society, and international partners to ensure that this evidence is safely preserved as a part of our national documentary heritage. And in the end, transitional justice is impossible without evidence. Evidence is impossible without systematic preservation of documents, and systematic preservation is impossible without a strong institutional archival policy. This is precisely the role of the State Archival Service of Ukraine. Thank you for your attention, and please, next slide. There is my contact. Let's keep in touch. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tatiana. It's such a powerful example of cooperation between governments and civil society organizations, as you've said, to plan for and promote accountability towards IDPs and other victims of the conflict. So thank you so much for sharing this really critical experience with us. I just wanted to flag for those in the audience that if you have questions that you would like to pose to the panelists, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can send your questions in that way. And I'll, as moderator, ask as many of those questions as I can to the panelists. Before we turn it over to the audience section of the Q&A, I wanted to introduce our colleague Harding Lang, who will share some initial reflections with us on the presentations offered by Laura and Tatiana. Hardin is the Vice President for Programs and Policy at Refugees International and has long experience working in a variety of different UN missions where questions about displacement and also accountability and justice have been central. So thank you for joining us, Hardin, and for kicking off our conversation.
Megan, thank you very much. And Tatiana and Laura, those were fantastic presentations. And I guess before we get to the audience questions, which is where we really need to spend a lot of time, I just wanted to flag a couple of the issues that you raised that I think really resonate across some of the work that we've been doing and hold important truths in this process, sort of moving forward. The first, Laura, when you were talking about the importance of, or the role that violence played, right? And the fact that forced displacement was quite often actually the intention, right? That was the strategic objective of a lot of that violence. And we need to understand that going into truth and transitional justice processes. I think that's extremely true and very relevant to any number of contexts in which we've worked, whether it's Central America or the Balkans or elsewhere, going back a number of years. Though the use of violence by the state is often designed to achieve forced displacement as part of a military strategy. And if we don't look at that when we're coming to processes of transitional justice, we're missing a core part of what will allow any sort of return process to actually be something that can be maintained or sustainable over time. And you think about, and there are very powerful roles for documentation in doing that, right? We've been able in certain situations and cases to show through the collection of data and information through testimonies and other forms, being able to show that the nature of the violence that was perpetrated was designed, right, to achieve mass forced displacement in different areas, and in such a way that it is actually relevant not just to truth and reconciliation processes, but also to national processes or national trial processes, justice processes, as well as international ones. There was a case involving in the Balkans in which they were able to use data around forced displacement and the use of military power to achieve forced displacement that was part of the Milosevic conviction at The Hague. So this data can play an incredibly important role, and this experience of truth and reconciliation and what happened to these populations and what happened to internally displaced can play a very big role, not just in a reconciliation process, but also in legal processes at the national and international level. So hats off. And I think the Colombian process has done a lot of this work, and it's something to really be appreciated. And then Tatiana, to one of your points about what you were describing in Ukraine and the role particularly of the State Archive and others, it's a whole of society response, right, to this work. And one of the reasons why this is so significant is if you think about Ukraine in the past, right, like the first couple of months in response to the full-scale invasion, all of society stood up and responded to the humanitarian emergency. It was the national government, it was local actors, local governments, it was the private sector, it was civil society. Everyone adapted and moved to respond. And it wasn't the international humanitarian agencies that allowed that to happen. It was the whole of society of Ukrainians, civil society standing up to do that. And they've remained to be the most effective components of the humanitarian response moving forward. And as a result, they're on the front line of a lot of this, right? So the ability of the state to work with civil society to collect and document in live time and to go back in that, those those systems, I mean, one of the things that quite struck me talking to humanitarian responders in Ukraine, Ukrainian humanitarian responders, was the sophistication of the mechanisms they were bringing to bear, right, to like do the work that they were doing. And there's a huge opportunity in Ukraine to show that same whole of society response, much in the way in parts of Colombia this was also true, right? If memory serves, there were 30 plus different sets of exercises to collecting the data and the information about what had occurred in terms of the use of mass violence in Colombia against the population that led to displacement. So I think the whole of society approach is something that we all have a lot to learn from. Also, I would say, you know, Laura, one of the things that really struck me about the Colombia experience was the role of consultation with affected communities and the internally displaced, recognizing from the beginning the significance and importance of displaced communities in the truth and reconciliation process, because that had been the intent of a lot of the violence. One of the things that, like, it sounds as though, you know, we have seen in all of our work is the importance not just of participation, but that of like actual agency in making decisions, right? And so I think in Colombia you begin to see this, but the importance of not only the participation in the processes, but that folks who experience forced displacement internally to be able to help set the parameters under which that engagement happens, right? To be able to, like, at the design stage of these truth and reconciliation processes, that they are part of that and sharing their experience early on, and that they have like agency in how those processes are designed. And then including there in many of these cases, to get access to truth and reconciliation processes for internally displaced, it is not an easy process, right? And a lot of work needs to go into making sure that those processes are accessible to populations that have been internally displaced and are still living in very difficult moments, right? And like with their own communities where these situations are quite tense as a result of violence. And a final point, just to underscore that the importance of understanding the patterns and what occurred as part of the use of violence and forced displacement are absolutely critical, not just to like truth and reconciliation processes, but also to any kind of like return process and reconciliation. We see in so many different contexts where people who are displaced, when they go back into their communities, you know, there are housing, land, and property challenges that need to be uncovered. And if you're not going into those processes, understanding the nature of the violence that occurred, what it resulted in, and then designing processes that internally displaced people have access to that can resolve not just the historical injustice, but the very real challenges they're facing at that moment when they come back and return, the rest of the humanitarian recovery agenda really is in jeopardy. And so that the work that Laura, you're doing, and Tatiana, what you're doing, paves the way to societal healing, but also to recovery and reconstruction in the wake of a conflict.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hardin, for those really rich reflections based on both our colleagues' presentations, but also your professional practice as well. We have received various questions from the audience, and if others have questions that they would like to raise, please do use the Q&A function. Our first question is for Tatiana. So Tatiana, could you tell us a little bit more about how IDPs themselves are getting involved in the process of working with the Ukrainian archives and how they share documentation of their experiences?
Thank you for the question. I would highlight a few key points. First, IDPs themselves act as a direct witness. They share their experience of displacement, loss, and human rights violations through interviews and other forms of documentation. Second, many civil society initiatives work closely with IDPs or are established with their participation. And through our initiative, our hub, we aim to bring this initiative together and strengthen cooperation with archives. And maybe the third, we have recently started engaging more directly with IDP self-governing organization. We encourage them to reflect on the long-term value of the records that they create, and to consider transferring them for archival preservation.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Tatiana. Laura, we also have a question for you. The transitional justice process in Colombia has been underway for many years now and is further along than the process in Ukraine and in many of the other contexts in which our participants for today are living and working. So could you tell us more about how IDPs have participated in this process over, the many years that it's been unfolding?
Okay, sure. Thank you for the question. Well, their role has been fundamental in at least for me in 3 dimensions. First, as I will say, in the construction of through dozens of displaced persons have shared their testimonies in space such as the Through Commission and the Special Jurisdiction for the Peace. And through their accounts, it has been possible to demonstrate that displacement wasn't an isolated or accident event, but a strategy used by our actors for territorial control and land dispersion. In my case, for example, I want to share this with you. I contribute to the development of several reports for the True Commission, whose findings served as inputs for its final report. This shows that displaced persons actively contribute to building the country's collective memory. Without these voices, we wouldn't have such a clear understanding of what happened. And second, in demanding justice, displaced communities have not been passive. They have organized, advocate, and pushed institutions to investigate and recognize responsibility. Both through formal participatory mechanisms, such as the Mesa de Víctimas or Victims Roundtable, and through broader civic engagement spaces. In many cases, our persistence has been decisive in ensuring that displacement is treated as a serious crime. And third, and the last one, is in shaping the model itself. In Colombia, transitional justice wasn't built solely by the states, but by the state. For years, victims, including displaced persons, drove agendas, participated in dialogue and advocacy spaces, and positioned the need for a system that wouldn't only punish, but also guarantee through reparation and non-repetition. This is reflected in the peace agreement, where victims play a direct role by bringing their proposals and experience to the negotiation table. And thanks to this advocacy, we now have a model that recognizes their rights and central role.
Great, thank you very much. So in terms of additional questions from the audience, I'll share two to get us going further. So first, Laura, I think this is a question for you. Could you tell us more about your perspectives on the connection between transitional justice and sustainable peace? So do these mechanisms help to create a peace that lasts? I mean, there's still violence going on in Colombia today, so perhaps you could share with us some of your reflections on the contributions, but also the limitations of these mechanisms. And then second, we had a question that I think is relevant for you, Laura, but also for Tatiana, about the ways in which transitional justice and accountability processes can respond to incidents of sexual and gender-based violence in war. Are there ways, for example, in which evidence is collected in relation to those kinds of violations, which are, of course, often experienced by displaced people? So, Laura, we'll hear from you, and then we'll turn it over to Tatiana.
Well, the connection between peace agreement and transitional justice in Colombia is basically that the transitional justice was born from the transitional justice. Even before that, this peace agreement we had, like we was in a building of a construction of the transitional model. We make a reality this model in the peace agreement. So without the peace agreement, we couldn't have the transitional model that we have already. So this peace agreement put the victims or IDPs in the center of the agreement and can impulse the transitional model with the different systems that or institutions that I mentioned before. That is 3, but basically without the participation of the victims on the peace agreement and put on the victims on the center of the peace agreement, we couldn't have the model that we have right now, because we have the person who proposed this model. We have the person who say that we have to stay in the center of the agreement, and we say in that moment that we need a transitional justice that include our voices, but not only from the justice system, if not but the through commission and search of person that demand. I think that.
Thank you. Tatiana, can we turn it over to you?
As a Ukrainian perspective, a lot of civil society organizations are collecting information related to conflict, related to sexual violation. And at this stage, this evidence is primarily used nowadays within criminal proceedings and compensation mechanism. At the same time, we are working on how such materials can later be transferred for long-term preservation to state archives in a way that fully respects confidentiality, sensitivity, and the rights of survivors.
Thank you very much. Laura, did you want to add on the question of accountability towards sexual and gender-based violence?
Accountability, can you repeat, please?
There was this question about the extent to which transitional justice processes can address sexual and gender-based violence. Is that a question that you wanted to answer? It's okay if not.
Well, maybe a balance. I think that could be a question that I don't have the exactly statistics, but I maybe talk about the perspective of some victims, or maybe myself perspective. I think that the balance is positive. Maybe we couldn't be doing better, because we have many politics problems in our country, and there are also people that are not agree with this model, and there are like powerful politics policies, and that they don't want to continue with this model because they say that it punished with the people. But also people, for example, in my case, I think that this put the conversation in the center of Colombia, and the justice transitional model put the conversation about IDPs and for displacement and armed conflict in the center of the agenda of the institutions in Colombia, public institutions in Colombia. And we have good results, for example, in the public audiencias of the Jurisdiction Special for Peace. There are a lot of person who has accused, and they are talk about the truth to the families who has suffered for example, disappear their families or they kill their families, and the people who participate in that are telling the truth, and that was there is a positive for the through for that families and for the peace of that family. And I think that is very relative because depend of the perspective of the people. But I think that in generally of victims, we say that it's positive because we build this, we participate in the construction of this.
Thank you very much. Hardin, there was a question that I would like to pose to you, and it was about the question of the accountability of individual perpetrators for violence and crimes associated with displacement. You know, some of these transitional justice mechanisms target society at large, but there's also the question of what individual people have done. And could you share your thoughts on the extent to which these mechanisms can make a dent on that level as well?
Sure. I think one of the things that they can do that are really quite powerful is as you begin to like collect and analyze the experiences and the data, and this is about who did what to whom over space and time. Yes, it's true that in a lot of cases we're able to get at individual response, like who committed what crime in a given moment against a given actor or a given victim. And that is powerful and important in terms of accountability moving forward. But there's also a wider agenda in terms of what were like the policies and the command structures that led to this kind of state violence in many cases. And when you start to aggregate the experiences of victims across time and space, you can begin to map those experiences and show how the violence evolved and moved. And this is something, for example, that again, we saw in the Balkans, and other places in Central America where you could demonstrate, right, that here's what the command structure looked like. Here were the people who were in charge of a given area of operations. And this is the kind of violence that happened, in essence, by state actors under their watch. And as they moved over time to different locations and different places, that violence quite often followed. And so you can use, through the aggregation of this information, you can begin to hold people accountable at a command level. And that gets back to the institutional and the policy accountability questions that are essential for ensuring non-repetition, right? If the question of individual accountability happens at a lower level, we're not necessarily getting at the bigger question or the bigger challenge that led to the forced displacement in the beginning, people being held accountable for that. And we have seen people held accountable both at the national level and national instruments, national court systems, and at the international level for the perpetration of mass violence that led to with the design of forced displacement. And so I think that there are remedies at the local level, there are remedies at the national level, and at the international level that are quite powerful. And just very quickly, there was a point in the chat or in the questions about what can be done now. Right? We're experiencing the violence now, like as its own, like what role can civil society play? And I would just say, you look no farther. This is happening in Ukraine. This happened in Colombia. It happened in Syria, where you had organizations, for example, in Syria, like the White Helmets, that were documenting from the get-go, right, what happened in terms of the nature of violence. And it is, at least in my limited experience, can be quite empowering for people who have experienced or who have witnessed it. And they're moving from like mutual aid and humanitarian response to begin to think about accountability questions. It's a place when they begin to document out that can be quite powerful from the moment and then into a transitional process so that it is organic and living process and not one that's just retrospective.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Before we close, Laura and Tatiana, I also just wanted to give you both a chance to respond to this important question that was raised about what local civil society organizations can do in the midst of conflict to start laying the foundations for the pursuit of justice. If you have any additional thoughts on that question that you would like to share, please do feel free.
Well, I think that we can do it too much because if the victims or IDPs are organized we can start to request or we are start to request our needs, because anyone knows our needs like we are, right? So and this is that we are talking about in different spaces, that we are not just like consultative persons. We are part of the construction of peace or solutions or projects, etc. So we in this moment are the person who building this process. For example, in Colombia, without victims or without the organization of the IDPs, we couldn't have this model that we have in this moment. And even in this moment, we continue to participate, not only since the institutional spaces, if not that the common participation spaces, because the people that in the municipalities and in the faraway territories decide, organize, and to take action, and maybe go to the major and solicit, require a solution for these needs. So we are participating, we are raising our voices, and we are participate in the solution, in the make a decision for the solution. And without us, the countries, the institutions, or maybe the universities or the organizations couldn't have or couldn't take decision, because we know our needs, we know our requests, because nobody knows as we know our needs. So I think that that's my opinion about this.
Thank you so much, Laura. Tatiana, is there anything you would like to share as a final word?
I can say that Ukraine has a unique situation because nowadays we are simultaneously overcoming two tracks on transitional justice. We are overcoming totalitarian legacy, and we are overcoming now a full-scale invasion consequences. And we understand that Russia was never punished, and we try to do our best to create this foundation to the next trial process. And this is our main goal.
Thank you so much. These are challenging questions, and you've all done such a great job of opening them up in a way that I think we can all benefit and learn from your experiences. So thank you very much for being here. I'll turn it over to our colleagues at RI, Sarah Miller, and at Georgetown, Beth Ferris, to conclude our conversation for today. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, panel two. It was a really rich discussion. I know we've learned a lot. Beth has said she's taken more than 12 pages of notes. I think it's a volume we have to work with here. Beth, if you'd like to offer any comments, otherwise I'll probably close us out. Please go ahead.
I'll just say we're going to post a written summary of the meeting as well as the recording in the next week. And this is the third conference we've organized, and we plan to do it again next year, so stay tuned. But I'll leave it to you, Sarah, to thank everybody, because there are a lot of people to thank, including all of you who've hung in here this long.
Yes, we appreciate all of you in different time zones around the world who've joined us from all different places. We still have the Special Rapporteur back on in motion, who opened us up wonderfully, and some exceptional panels and a session on the handbook. We really appreciate it. It's been a rich discussion. I think it's clear there's a lot of work ahead to be done. Thanks again. Colleagues behind the scenes here have been flurrying around to make sure these panels run smoothly. all of the panelists and moderators and speakers, colleagues at Georgetown, ODI, the Ukrainian Congress of IDP Councils, and the Office of the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of IDPs, and of course, my colleagues at Refugees International. We really appreciate it. We will, as Beth said, be posting a summary and following up with the recording. And stay tuned. We plan to continue doing this. So hopefully next year we'll be messaging you all about the next conference as well. With that, thank you again and have a wonderful day.